You're already 3 days behind on the tummy time log. Did the pediatrician not go over this with you? She said it while bouncing my 6-week-old daughter against her hip, moving through my living room like she was doing a walkthrough inspection. I was still in my robe. My hair hadn't been brushed in 2 days. It was 6:52 inches the morning. And my mother-in-law had let herself in through the side door she'd convinced my husband to leave unlocked in case of emergencies. My name is Claire Bennett. I've been married to my husband for 4 years, and for the last 14 months, since the day we told his family I was pregnant, his mother, Renee Foster, has treated my home, my body, my parenting, and my marriage like a renovation project she was personally contracted to oversee. She didn't start with the baby. She started with the pregnancy. At 8 weeks, she emailed my husband a PDF about prenatal supplements I probably wasn't taking. At 12 weeks, she showed up to my first trimester appointment unannounced, told the receptionist she was my mother, and was already sitting in the waiting room when I arrived. I remember standing in that doorway with my coat still on, and she smiled up at me like she'd done me a tremendous favor. She had opinions about my birth plan. She had opinions about my hospital bag. When I told her I intended to breastfeed, she said, softly, with that particular smile of hers, that some women simply aren't built for it, and that there was absolutely no shame in formula. The way she said it, gentle, rehearsed, made it sound like a kindness. It wasn't. My husband is a good man. I want to be clear about that. He loves me. He just loves his mother in the way that certain men love their mothers, completely, unquestioningly, with a refusal to look directly at anything she does that might complicate that love. When I'd bring something up, he'd rub the back of his neck and say, "She means well, Claire, that's just how she is." And I'd nod, because what else do you do with a sentence that forecloses every possible response? That's just how she is. Those 4 words became the wallpaper of my marriage. After our daughter was born, Renee arrived at the hospital before my own mother did. She was holding a car seat she'd purchased without asking, the one the pediatrician recommends. She told my husband, as if our own research didn't count. She held the baby for 3 hours while I was still recovering. When I asked for my daughter back, she laughed and said, "You need rest, sweetheart," in the same tone a nurse might use with an uncooperative patient. We named our daughter Sophie. Renee started calling her Soph. I asked her twice to use her full name. The 3rd time, I let it go. I was so tired. New mothers are always so tired, and people like Renee know exactly how to operate in that window. The drop-in started the week we came home from the hospital. Monday, Wednesday, Friday became assumed. Then Tuesday got added because I was already in the neighborhood. Then Sunday, just for a quick visit. She had a key because my husband gave her one before we'd even discussed it, and when I asked about it later, he said it made sense given how close she lives. She lives 11 minutes away. By the time Sophie was 2 months old, Renee had a standing presence in our home that no one had officially invited and no one seemed willing to revoke. She reorganized my pantry. She rearranged the nursery without telling me, moving the bassinet away from the draft, a draft that did not exist. She threw away a cracked plastic cup I'd been meaning to replace, a birthday gift from my college roommate, without asking. When I mentioned it, she said, it was a hazard with the baby around. Sophie was 6 weeks old and nowhere near the kitchen. She started bringing her own food over. Not to share, to replace. She'd quietly move my Tupperware to the back of the fridge and fill the front shelves with her casseroles, labeled with masking tape and a Sharpie like she was stocking a community kitchen she managed. My husband thought it was thoughtful. I thought about the Tupperware. The text messages started around month 3. I found out by accident. My husband left his phone on the counter unlocked while he showered, and a notification came through from his mother that read, "She seems really low today. Have you noticed? I'm worried about postpartum." I stood there for a long moment. Then I kept reading. The thread went back weeks. Photos of laundry. A screenshot of the sink from the previous Thursday. A close-up of Sophie's changing table bottles and wipes arranged imperfectly, apparently. "I just want to make sure she's managing." That was the phrase she repeated across at least a dozen messages. I just want to make sure she's managing. As if managing were something I was failing at, as if she were the metric. I didn't say anything that night. I went into the bathroom, ran the water, and stood at the sink for a few minutes. I was not managing poorly. I had a 6-month-old, a part-time consulting job I'd just returned to, a household I was largely running alone because my husband traveled 3 days a week, and a mother-in-law who treated every normal imperfection of domestic life as evidence of my incompetence. I was tired and I was angry, and I was starting to understand something I hadn't fully formed yet. She wasn't concerned about me. She was constructing a version of me. The dinner happened on a Saturday in October. My husband's family came over, his sister and her husband, 2 cousins, his aunt from Phoenix, and his grandmother, who'd driven in from Tucson specifically. 12 people. I cooked for 2 days. Pot roast, roasted vegetables, 2 pies from scratch. I cleaned the house the night before. I vacuumed under the furniture. I ironed the tablecloth. I did everything I knew how to do because somewhere in me I already sensed that this was not a casual family lunch. Renee arrived 45 minutes early. She came through the side door again. She wore a silk blouse I'd never seen before, pearl earrings, and a look on her face like someone about to deliver a commencement speech. I watched her scan the kitchen when she walked in. I watched her eyes move from the counter to the stove to the floor, and I knew she was looking for something. I had given her nothing. Lunch went smoothly for the first 2 hours. Sophie was passed around, admired, photographed. My mother-in-law was gracious and warm in the way she always was when there were witnesses. She refilled glasses. She laughed easily. She called me Han in that half-affectionate way that somehow always lands slightly wrong. It happened during dessert. She tapped her water glass with the back of a spoon. The table went quiet. She stood up slowly, like she'd been waiting for that moment all day because she had, and she smiled around the table with the calm of someone who had rehearsed. "I hope everyone knows how much we all love this little family," she began. Her voice was measured and warm. The voice of someone who understood that controlled emotion is more dangerous than loud emotion. "Daniel has always been my greatest pride. And Sophie is just, she's everything." She paused, and I felt my stomach shift, the way it does on an elevator that drops unexpectedly. She reached into her bag. She pulled out a manila folder. "I've been a little worried lately," she said, still gently, still warmly. "I know we don't always talk about the hard things, but I think that's what family is for." She opened the folder. Inside were printed photographs. I recognized them immediately, the angles, the timestamps in the bottom corner. Photos taken from inside my home. "I've just noticed some things, and I think it's worth having a conversation about what's best for Sophie." The room shifted. Someone set down a fork. My husband's aunt leaned slightly forward. His grandmother tilted her head. There were 8 photographs. The laundry basket from the upstairs hallway. The bathroom counter, cluttered with the particular beautiful chaos of a house with an infant. Sophie's playmat surrounded by toys. The kitchen sink with 3 mugs from that morning. None of it was alarming. None of it looked like neglect. But Renee had arranged them in a neat stack and was distributing them around the table like evidence exhibits, and the context she was narrating over each one, the pauses, the weighted sighs, the soft, "I just wonder if we need more support here," was turning ordinary photographs into an indictment. I looked at my husband. He was frozen, processing, trying to reconcile the woman who had cooked his favorite meal with the photographs, now sitting in front of his aunt. I looked at Renee. She was looking at me. And she said, with perfect composure, "Sometimes the people who love us most need to be willing to ask the hard questions, especially when a child is involved." The table went very still. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself to an audience that was never going to be unbiased, because Renee had not gathered this family to have a conversation. She had gathered them to watch. She had arranged this entire afternoon as theater, and the role she had written for me was the one she'd been scripting for 14 months. I excused myself. Quietly, I said, "I'll be right back," folded my napkin, and walked to the bathroom. I locked the door and sat on the edge of the tub with my hands in my lap, and I let 30 seconds pass. Then a minute. I stared at the grout between the tiles. I was not falling apart. I was deciding. When I came back to the table, the conversation had moved on. The way conversations do when they're too uncomfortable to sustain. My husband's cousin was asking about Sophie's sleep schedule. His grandmother had begun clearing plates. Renee was seated, composed, satisfied in the small, private way of someone who has accomplished what they came to do. That night, after everyone left and Sophie was asleep, my husband sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "I'm sorry that got uncomfortable." I looked at him. Uncomfortable. She went too far. He rubbed his neck. But she's worried. I know she is. She took photographs of our home, I said. For months, and she shared them with your entire family. She shouldn't have done it like that. Like what? In public? Or at all? He didn't answer. I went to bed. He stayed downstairs. And I lay in the dark next to the baby monitor with its soft green glow, and I stopped being hurt. I stopped being surprised. I thought about that folder. I thought about how long she'd been collecting. I thought about the deliberateness of it, the silk blouse, the early arrival, the manila folder in her bag, the pearls. She hadn't acted out of impulse. She had planned this. She had prepared. So I started preparing too. I did not tell my husband what I was doing. I did not tell my sister. I did not write anything down that I wasn't willing to have discovered. I simply started paying attention in a new way, the way you pay attention when you understand that attention itself is a tool. I bought a small security camera system, 3 cameras total, all visible, all clearly positioned. I mounted one at the front door, one in the main hallway, one in the living room. When my mother-in-law arrived the following Wednesday and noticed them, she said, "Oh, getting a security system?" I said yes. She nodded and walked past them like they didn't concern her. That told me something useful. I installed a smart lock on the side door. I explained to my husband that I wanted a log of entries and exits, especially now that Sophie was crawling. He agreed without resistance. What he didn't know was that I had already, quietly, reset the access codes, including the one his mother had been given. I didn't change the code dramatically. I simply changed it in a way that would only become apparent when she tried to use it. I started keeping a log in a password-protected notes app on my phone. Dates and times of every unannounced visit. Direct quotes when I could remember them. A record of every photograph I noticed her taking. The log went back as far as my memory was reliable, and I was surprised how reliable my memory was when I started trusting it. I made a pediatrician appointment and, at the end of it, asked the doctor directly to document Sophie's developmental status in writing. I asked for growth charts, milestone records, vaccination history, and a signed letter summarizing our daughter's overall health and home environment. The doctor looked slightly puzzled but obliged. She had never had any concerns, she said. Sophie was thriving. I said, "I'd like that in writing, please." I contacted a family attorney not to file anything, not yet, just to ask questions. What constituted harassment? What documentation would be relevant? What interference with parental rights meant under our state's family code? The attorney was a woman about 15 years older than me, and when I finished describing the dinner, she said flatly, "This is not an unusual situation. Document everything." I already was. And then I did something that required more composure than anything else I'd done in 14 months. I called Renee. I called her on a Thursday afternoon, while Sophie was napping, with every camera recording and my notes app open on the counter. "I've been thinking about the dinner," I said. My voice was steady. "I know you're worried about Sophie, and I want us to be able to talk about that openly. Would you come by next Tuesday morning? Just us." A pause. Brief. She was recalibrating. "Of course," she said. "I'd love that." She arrived at 9:15. I heard the side door, first the soft rattle of someone trying a familiar handle, then a pause, then the footsteps redirecting to the front. The doorbell rang. I opened it. "The side door is being temperamental," I said, smiling. "Come in." She stepped inside and looked at the hallway. It was clean, minimal. Sophie's toys were in a basket, not scattered. The kitchen was clear. The cameras were visible, she clocked them. I saw her eyes move, but she said nothing. I made coffee. I set out 2 mugs. I sat across the table from her and let her begin. Because people like Renee always believe they should be the one to set the frame. "I want you to know I love you like a daughter," she started. "I know you do," I said. The dinner, I realized the way I handled it wasn't ideal. Tell me what you were hoping would happen, I said. Genuine question. Steady tone. No accusation in it. She paused. I wanted the family to understand what I'd been seeing. I wanted support for Daniel. Support for Daniel, I repeated. Not for me. You've been struggling, she said, and the gentleness in her voice was so practiced it almost passed for real. Anyone could see it. I nodded slowly. Then I reached across the table and slid a folder toward her. I've been doing some documentation too, I said. Inside the folder was Sophie's full pediatric record for the past 6 months, growth charts in the 68th percentile, developmental milestones met on schedule, vaccination record, current, and the letter from our pediatrician signed and dated stating that Sophie presented as a healthy, well-attached infant in a stable and nurturing home environment. No concerns noted. Renee looked at the first page without touching it. I'd also like to show you something, I said. I opened my laptop, which was already connected to the wall-mounted TV in the living room. The screen came on. The security system's archived footage appeared organized by date, clearly time-stamped. This is from the last 6 weeks, I said. I let her watch. She watched herself enter through the side door on a Tuesday at 7:08 inches the morning while I was nursing Sophie in the upstairs room. She watched herself open the kitchen drawer and go through it. She watched herself stand in the hallway holding her phone, photographing the coat rack, the shoe basket, the stack of mail on the console table. She watched herself lift a piece of that mail, turn it over, and examine the return address. I had 7 clips. I played 4 of them. When I paused the footage, the room was completely silent. I wasn't, she started. You opened our mail, I said. That's a federal offense. I want you to know I know that, and I want you to know I have this on record. Her posture had changed. The silk blouse composure was still there, mostly, but something underneath it had shifted. She looked like someone who had walked into a room expecting one kind of conversation and found an entirely different one waiting. You recorded me without my knowledge, she said. In common areas of my own home, I said. Yes. You were given notice the day you saw the cameras installed. You chose not to ask about them. She looked at the laptop, then at me, then at the folder still sitting between us on the table. I opened the folder to the second section. This is what I'd like to explain to you, I said. It was a printed email. Her email address in the sender field. A recipient I didn't recognize at first until I read the signature, a family attorney, different from the one I'd consulted. Someone she had clearly found on her own. The subject line read, Initial Inquiry Grandparent Rights, State of Arizona. The email was 4 paragraphs long. It described me by name. It described Sophie by name. It described a list of concerns Renee had compiled about my fitness as a mother, framed in the careful language of someone who had Googled how to document a custody case before writing it. She had not sent it yet. She had saved it as a draft, apparently on a shared family desktop I had access to through a household cloud account that she had forgotten connected us both. I had found it 3 weeks earlier. I had printed it. I had read it 40 times. You were building a case, I said. My voice didn't waver. Not because you were worried about Sophie. Because you wanted to take her. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. I would never, she began. It's saved in your drafts, I said. With your name on it. Her mouth closed. The front door opened. My husband stepped in. I had texted him an hour before, told him to come home, told him it was important. He stepped into the living room and looked at the television screen, which still showed a paused frame of his mother standing at our mail console with an envelope in her hand. He looked at me. He looked at the folder. He looked at his mother. Mom, he said quietly. Daniel, this is not what it. Is that your email address? He was looking at the printed page. She didn't answer. Is that a lawyer you contacted about our daughter? I was exploring options, she said. I was worried. You were preparing to take our child, he said. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just plainly, with the particular flatness of a man who has just watched a version of his mother he could not unknow. She stood up. I had expected tears or anger or a long defense, but what she did was draw herself up to her full height and say, with the last of her composure, I did everything because I love this family. You loved this family into a custody draft, I said. She had no answer to that. I picked up the final envelope from the table. I had prepared it the night before, sitting at the kitchen counter after Sophie fell asleep, with the only clarity that comes from being pushed past the point where you have anything left to lose. Inside was a formal notice, not legal, not yet, but written clearly and signed, a trespass warning, stating that entry to our home without a scheduled and confirmed invitation would be treated as unauthorized access, and that a formal trespass report would be filed with our county sheriff's office on any subsequent violation. Attached was a copy of the smart lock access log, every entry from the past 6 weeks timestamped and printed. Attached also was the pediatric letter. I held it out to her. She took it. I have no intention of removing you from Sophie's life, I said. She loves you. That matters to me. But you will call ahead. You will come when invited. You will not enter this house without my or my husband's explicit permission. And if you ever take another step toward any legal action involving my daughter, I will use everything in this folder. She stood at our front door and looked at me for a long moment. She looked the way people look when they have spent a long time believing they are the protagonist of a story and have suddenly encountered evidence that they are not. You've made yourself very clear, she said. Yes, I said, I have. After the door closed, my husband didn't speak for a while. He stood in the middle of our living room with his hands in his pockets, and I could see him working through it, not the logistics. Those were simple enough, but the grief of it. The particular grief of discovering that someone you have trusted completely has been operating in ways that required you not to look too closely. How long have you known? He asked finally. The email? 3 weeks. The rest of it? About 2 months. You didn't tell me. You would have told her, I said. Not on purpose. But you would have. He looked at the floor. He didn't argue with that, because he knew it was true, and I think that honesty between us, the willingness to say the hard thing without softening it into nothing, was the thing that cracked something open. I should have seen it, he said. She was careful, I said. She knew your blind spots. That's not your fault. But going forward, it can't keep working the way it has. He nodded slowly. He came and sat down on the couch next to me, close enough that his shoulder was against mine, and we sat like that for a while without saying anything. Sophie made a small sound from the monitor. The house was quiet. She's going to tell the whole family you manipulated this, he said. Probably, I said. You're okay with that? I thought about it honestly. About the dinner. About the photographs distributed around a table to 12 people who loved my husband. About the manila folder and the silk blouse and the pearls. About the email draft with my name and my daughter's name and the word unfit appearing in the second paragraph. She already told the whole family her version, I said. Now, they can decide which story holds up. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, I gave her that key without asking you. You did. I should have asked. Yes, it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just true, said plainly, which is sometimes the only way things that need saying can be said. Renee called twice in the following week. I didn't answer. She texted my husband 3 times. He responded to each one in a way I hadn't seen him respond before, briefly, with clarity, without apology. The 4th message she sent to both of us together read, I only ever wanted what was best for this family. Neither of us replied. She sent a card addressed to Sophie for our daughter's upcoming birthday. It arrived in the mail, sealed, addressed to Sophie Rose Bennett in careful cursive. It was the first thing she'd sent through the mail in 14 months, rather than simply walking through the door with it in her hand. It was a small thing. It was also the whole point. I set it on Sophie's dresser for when she's old enough to read. Because I don't need her grandmother to disappear. I don't need anyone to be a villain for the rest of their lives. What I needed was for my home to be mine, actually, practically, without question, mine. For the side door to be mine. For the drawer with the utensils to be mine. For the version of myself that existed in my own house to be the authoritative one. None of that required a fight. It required a folder. It required me to stop waiting for someone else to protect what was mine, and to understand, at 7 inches the morning in my robe with unbrushed hair and 6 weeks of sleep deprivation in my bones, that I was already capable of protecting it myself. I just needed to stop apologizing for it. The house is quieter now, not emptier. Sophie fills it up completely, the way only a 10-month-old can, with her unreasonable joy and her absolute confidence that the world exists for her entertainment. My husband makes coffee in the morning, and we drink it together at the kitchen table before she wakes up. No one has come through the side door unannounced in 7 weeks. I left the cameras up, not because I expect anything, but because they're mine. Because I put them there, and they stay until I decide they don't. And there's something about that, the simple, unambiguous fact of a decision that belongs entirely to me, that still feels like something I want to keep holding on to for a while.